We've got Wes Streeting with us in the studio. You'll know he's often on LBC. He's a Labour MP for Ilford North, Shadow Secretary of State for Child Poverty. Am I right?
Well, probably more against them for child poverty.
Well, but that's kind of, right. Okay. Oh, if you're going to start on that. I know you caught the last 10 minutes of that hour. I don't know how much correspondence you have on these sorts of subjects from constituents, but it's for people who have where disability has not touched their lives, not touched their families. I think it is quite an eye-opener to hear those kind of stories.
It is, and on issues like this, you normally get kind of auto-generated campaign emails, on different sides of really difficult social issues like this one. And it is no substitute for hearing real stories and people's personal experiences and why it matters to them. And I thought that was incredibly powerful. You nearly set me off before I came in. I was thinking, you've got to hold it together. You're about to talk about cancer.
Yeah, well, let's turn on to that.
And I'm only here anyway because I saw what you did for Denise Headley. She got her own radio show out of coming on to talk to you. So I'm hoping I can be your holiday stand-in.
Well, you're already standing on For the Many podcast. I don't know what more you want out of us.
The award-winning For the Many podcast available on all good platforms.
Said that. Right, let's get down to business. I mean, I've said that you'll take calls on it. I mean, this is one of those subjects where sometimes people like to listen rather than necessarily phone in. But I'm going to encourage people to phone in. If you've been in a similar situation to Wes, where you suddenly get a cancer diagnosis and you go through all the treatment and come out the other side, I'm sure he'd like to hear your experiences. I would too, because cancer, it is, this is going to sound slightly awkward, but it is a bit like disability in that people find it awkward to talk about sometimes. And so that's kind of why I wanted you to come into the studio, not for a 5-minute interview, but so where we can really sort of get into the depths of what happened to you and how you felt along the way. So let's go back to that day when you were first diagnosed. Now, did you realise that something was wrong?
I had a suspicion something might be wrong because I went into hospital originally on the 3rd of March on budget day, and I had really chronic pain first thing in the morning. It was so bad I sort of phoned the NHS number and described my symptoms, and they said you should call for an ambulance and come to A&E. But I thought, well, I'm not going to get an ambulance. So I got in the car and Joe, my partner, drove me over to the hospital, and it was excruciating. It was really bad. And it turned out, as they did a scan while I was there. It turned out I had a kidney stone in my left kidney. And of course, that made sense and it's very painful. But then as I was sort of getting ready to leave, the A&E doctor came in and said, look, before you go, there's something else on your kidney that we just want to investigate. And I got all the reassurances. It's probably nothing. It could be fatty tissue. It could be a collection of, capillaries or something like that. And your age, your health, very unlikely to be anything sinister, but we want to reassure ourselves and you. So I thought, okay, that sounds sensible, and we arranged some scans. And then one of the scans I went into, actually, it was a mistake. I was meant to go in for a CT scan, but they sent me in for an ultrasound instead, which, although you might think, bit of a waste of time, actually it wasn't for 2 reasons. One was that the guy doing the ultrasound effectively ruled out all the things they said it might be. He said, well, it's definitely not fatty tissue. And he said, this is a solid lump. And he said, and I remember him saying something like, it's probably benign. And the moment you hear the word benign, you think tumour. And the moment you hear tumour, you think, well, it could be malignant, it could be cancer. So that was the first day that I Googled kidney cancer and realised that there are basically hardly any symptoms until it's advanced. And so I had an inkling that it could be cancer, but it wasn't until that day back in April when I got the phone call. And of course, because of COVID, everything's done over the phone. So there I was, sat in a very cold car park in Bury, where I was going out campaigning for the Labour Party at the beginning of the local election campaign, getting this diagnosis. And, the urologist at King George Hospital sort of phoned and he kind of locked me into a false sense of security, because he said, I've got some quite difficult cases to get through this afternoon, so I hope you don't mind if I phoned you early. So I want to talk to you first. And I thought, oh, great, he's getting the easy ones out of the way. He starts off talking about my kidney stones. I'm thinking, great, he's not mentioned the C word. And then it came, and it's kind of like time stops. And I was just trying to sort of process it in my head. And he was giving me lots of reassurance. He was saying that, we've caught this early. It's a low-grade cancer. You're going to have your kidney removed, but You can live a perfectly good life with one kidney. And he was giving me all this information, and then he sort of stopped and said, how do you, let me just stop there, and how are you sort of responding to this? And while this is going on, a couple of my friends are kind of waving through the car window saying, we're over here, we're ready for you. And I'm sort of pretending nothing's going on. And I sort of said to him, well, if I've understood this right, it's terrible news because I'm 38 years old and you've given me a cancer diagnosis, but I'm not going to die, and I'm going to lose a kidney, but it's all right because I've got 2 of those. So all in all, I'm probably quite lucky at those kidney stones. And he sort of laughed and said, that is a good way of looking at it, and you seem to have taken this rather well. And if I'm allowed to say this on LPC, I said, well, you delivered this shit sandwich rather well. But to be honest, I was still just processing it. And the good thing was the nurse who was listening in on the call phoned me a couple of hours later, because to be honest, you get this news and I was just... I didn't even really react to it. I was just kind of straight away almost in kind of crisis mode and like coping and thinking, right, well, like you get into kind of this organisational place where you try and compartmentalise your feelings and just focus on practicalities. So I just got out my car and just went out campaigning in hailstones in Bury, and I didn't really stop to think about the cancer until the campaigning was finished and I was on the phone to the nurse again and thinking about how I was going to tell my friends and family.
See, I'm trying to think, if I'd been in your situation, what I would have done. Would I have gone out campaigning, or would I have just been an emotional wreck in the car? I think it would have been the latter.
I'm quite a resilient person. I've cried about it plenty of times, but actually... Because people kind of asked me afterwards, what on earth were you doing going around campaigning for the Labour Party for the next month? Because after I got the diagnosis, I campaigned in 20 constituencies around the country. And people were like, what on earth are you doing? Especially sort of people who knew. And it was, I can't tell you what a great coping mechanism that was, because I was spending all my time with people in the Labour Party. Some people I already knew, some people who were brand new that I was meeting on the campaign trail. And without knowing anything about my diagnosis, they have no idea how much they helped me get through it, because on all of those days campaigning, I was able to not think about my diagnosis and just get on with things as normal. Whereas, when I was at home and when I was with, my partner, when I was with my family, it was kind of looming larger. I just kind of decided, well, I know what I'm doing. I know what the treatment's going to be. I know what I need to do, and let's just enjoy life as normal for as long as I can, because in just over a month's time, I'm going to be going for an operation and I'm going to be doing nothing after that. So that was my kind of mentality, and I tried to stay positive throughout. And I know some people around me thought I was kind of in denial or trying to displace my kind of anxiety about it, but I was able, luckily, to stay positive because my prognosis was very good and I trusted the doctors. And so the one thing I didn't think was, oh my God, I'm going to die.
Really?
Yeah, genuinely. It would have been, if at any point it looked like I was going to die, I'd be wondering what the surgeon had done, because they were so upfront with me, and they said, look, this is what's going to happen. I mean, there've been kind of things since my operation and thinking about my future, where I've kind of thought much more seriously about my life, what I do with my life, my health, exercise, my diet. Because the one thing I've now got to avoid, having lost a kidney, is diabetes and kidney disease. So, I have changed my diet and my I've started exercising for the first time in my life because, I've got to avoid diabetes. But all the way through, I felt like I was sort of trying to support other people, because actually I think my partner and my kind of family found this a lot harder than I did, especially my parents, because of course you never expect your children to have a cancer diagnosis, something you expect to happen to yourself or to your parents.
So you almost found yourself in the position of having to reassure them, whereas the normal partner or parental role would be to reassure you, it's going to be okay in the end, of course you're not going to die, and all the rest of it.
Yeah, and they were amazingly supportive, and there are lots of things I wouldn't have been gotten through without them, but no, a big part was also supporting them through this and trying to reassure them that I was going to be okay, and that when I said I was feeling upbeat and positive, I wasn't trying to pull the wool over their eyes. But there were difficult moments, and I remember watching, because Channel 4 had done this Stand Up for Cancer kind of short TV series, and my proud side of RC, the Conservative peer, was on there. And so we were watching Saeed, and of course every advert is 1 in 2 of us at some point in our lives going to get cancer, and that kind of set me and Joe off, and it was a bit kind of triggering. But actually, the harder bits, when I think about the process I went through, the COVID restrictions were hard because Joe wasn't coming in with me for key appointments with the surgeon. When I went in for my biopsy, which was a horrible experience, when I went in for my operation as well, it was harder on him than it was for me, but not having someone there was hard. And very lonely and frightening, actually. The first couple of times I went into hospital, that's kind of when I kind of felt real fear, when I went in for the biopsy and then I went in for the operation. And so not having someone there was very difficult. Those were the kind of the harder bits. And then coming out from the operation and going home, I found that really daunting. Because in the hospital, I thought, I'm doing everything right. I'm getting in and out of bed, and I'm following the instructions, and I'm holding down food, and I'm able to go to the loo. It all seemed to be kind of proceeding nicely. And then when I got home, the first challenge I had was learning how to get in and out of my own bed.
Well, we'll come to all of that in just a moment, but we have to go to a break now. It's 9:15.
LBC.
Understand.
Dale on LBC.
18 minutes past 9, we have Wes Streeting with us, the Labour MP for Ilford North and Shadow Secretary of State for something that isn't in favour of child poverty. That's what we've done. What is your actual official title?
Shadow Child Poverty Secretary.
All right, okay.
It's not hard.
I find it incredibly difficult. Well, particularly because there's not a department. There's not. And we've had this discussion before, but there's not an actual department to shadow, is there?
No, but that's because this government doesn't care about tackling child poverty, which is why it's constantly rising.
Let's not get onto that. Right, let's go back to talking about cancer. We got to the point where you'd been diagnosed and you were going in to have your biopsy and then the operation. When did you decide to go public on it? And was that a difficult decision to make?
It was, but it wasn't in the sense that I felt I had no choice, because one of the things about being a kind of an active, visible local MP, let alone kind of national responsibilities, is that people notice when you're not there, and things flare up from local issues, national issues in my constituency, international issues end up pouring into your inbox as well. And then if you don't reply, if you don't get back to people suddenly start saying, well, where's the MP? What's he saying? What's he doing? And I thought, given that I knew I was going to be off for months, I thought I can't just disappear. And I didn't want to kind of try and have a kind of, sort of ghostwriter or kind of have someone writing posts pretending I'm still around. So I just thought honesty is the best policy. And I know my constituency and my constituents well enough to know that they would support me and we'll come on to that. But my God, did they support me? And I found it quite overwhelming actually when I went public. But that's one of the reasons why, given the choice, if it was just down to me, I wouldn't have said anything, because it's a very private, personal thing. I mean, some of the hardest bits for me were telling people around me. I mean, I actually, Joe, my partner, and my mum and dad, they were not the first people I told, because I after I got the diagnosis, I was sort of processing it all. I'd been out knocking on doors. I'd spoken to the nurse, and I thought, right, well, I need to tell people. But I kind of felt okay in myself, despite the news and the surreal kind of nature of it in a way. But I thought I'm probably not going to know how I feel until I tell someone. And so I thought I don't want to just cry on the phone to Joe or my mum and dad. So I rang Matt, who runs my office and has been with me since before I was elected as my organiser as well. So I rang Matt and I said, look, I've got something to tell you. I told him. He reacted well. And I said, you're the first person I've told. And he was like, oh, right. I said, I just needed to tell someone just to know that I'm not going to burst into tears, because I thought the last thing Joe's going to need or my mum and dad are going to need is me kind of phoning and because I felt...
Thank God you never phoned me.
Well, exactly. You're terrible. You just get self. But, because I just thought, because I thought, I know I'm going to be all right, but, they're probably not going to believe me if I phone them and be like, sobbing down the phone saying, I've got cancer, but believe me, I'm going to be all right. So I just thought, right, I don't need to do that. So I did a practice run with Matt. But then the thing that I really underestimated, and I felt really guilty about actually, was that when it went public, I decided to put a little video on Twitter. I thought it might get some, an online news article or something like that. And then I was at home and I had I think I had Sky or BBC News channel on, and then this kind of breaking news thing flashed up and it had my face on it, and I thought, bloody hell, I was not expecting that. And then my dad, who he's a car salesman, he works not far from where I live, so a lot of my constituents will go into his showroom. He was inundated with emails and calls from current, former customers who were like, I'm so sorry to hear about Wes, I hope you're okay. And he found it really overwhelming. And I hadn't prepared my family for it. I hadn't said I was doing anything publicly. And I felt really guilty because I thought, blimey, they're going through all of this as it is. And then I've just kind of dropped this media. And I'm, you get used to the media side of politics when you're in it. But my family are not. And I've never wanted to kind of expose my family to it. So I felt like on top of everything else that they're dealing with, I've just given them this media kind of impact of loads of people they haven't heard from years being in touch, and they found that quite overwhelming.
And the interesting thing is also that there are several other MPs who have either gone through what you've just gone through or are at the moment. James Brokenshire being one who has not had the positive news that he's now having to step down from his duties to try and recover again. Tracy Crouch, now she's come through it as well. Chloe Smith as well. Did you talk to any of those? Yeah,
and there are other MPs who have been or who are also going through something similar, but they have not been public about it and don't want to. And I respect their position, but that it's very, very difficult for them because they are trying to keep the show on the road and deal with their health. that it's funny. You mentioned all three of them were in touch with me, and there is kind of now, I know, a cancer club in Parliament, effectively, of kind of current and former MPs who've been through it. No, we haven't got. No, God, the last thing we need in our life is a WhatsApp group. But no, I tell you what. People often see politics through the prism of all the rows and, the debates on your programme and others, and the areas where we disagree. And politics can be a brutal place, an unforgiving place, a harsh place. And yet what I experienced when my diagnosis went public was a total outpouring of love and support from across the political spectrum, from friends and foes alike, from people I've had rows with in politics, including, rows in my own party, rows with people in another party. People were just really love. Well, I know it's unheard of. People in the Labour Party disagree with each other, but people were absolutely lovely, and and Keir was brilliant as well. And one of the things that was particularly great about the support I had from my party and its leadership. I mean, they made it very clear that I was to go off and, take as much time as I needed. In fact, when I came back just before the summer on a kind of part-time basis and just easing myself in, they were like, "What are you doing here? We told you, don't come back till September." And also, Keir put me in the shadow cabinet, knowing full well that I had this diagnosis. Because I think I got the appointment before it went public. And, he did that knowing that I was going to be off, knowing I'd be out of action. I mean, how many employers treat their workers with cancer in that way? I mean, I've had some real horror stories of people who've been fired or managed out or, because of their cancer experience. So Keir has been brilliant. Right across the political spectrum. I mean, the Prime Minister was really nice and sent me a couple of notes, one when I was off, one when I came back. It's funny, I got the letter through and I said to Joe, Boris has written me a really nice letter. The bastard. I thought, I hope he doesn't think that I'm going to be nice to him just because he sent me this letter. But that's, and I basically, when I came back, I sent him a nice note back saying, I really appreciate it. I'm looking forward to getting stuck into you as soon as possible. And that's the thing, we can disagree in politics and we can have it out. But on a human level, we are just human beings. We are normal people. And when something like this happens, I find that Westminster kind of really rallies around you and supports
see the
each
best
other.
of it,
Yeah, in the same way when Boris was on life support during COVID and on his ventilator, I messaged Carrie to say, look, we politics aside, we are all rooting for him. We absolutely want him to come through this, and I think that kindness of politics often doesn't get an airing and isn't shown much, and maybe we should show a bit more of that.
Amanda's just tweeted, I believe Enoch Powell and Tony Benn were good friends. You're absolutely right. And sometimes you think, well, these cross-party friendships, maybe we ought to concentrate a little bit more on them. But look, you had a really great support network, it seems. But there'll be a lot of people who are in your situation or were in your situation who don't have that. What do we have the right level of support for people who are diagnosed? I mean, there's all sorts of cancer charities, of course. But I can imagine if you don't have the family support, if you don't have a partner, it can be a very, very lonely place going through that process.
I thought about this a lot. There are so many, and this is why it was part of my optimistic kind of outlook as I went through this, because I just thought, what have I got to complain about? I've got people in my life who have far worse cancer diagnoses than me. I went to say goodbye to my grandmother in 2014 because I thought she was about to die from her cancer. I mean, she's still going strong, but it is incurable. I've got a member of my team who's got cancer, and her treatment pathway is so much more severe and difficult than what I'm going through. And then you think about people who, their jobs and their incomes are at risk because of their cancer. That you're right, they haven't got the friends and family and support network that I've had. I mean, Joe was just a hero throughout the whole thing. He's basically sort of a living carer and doing his own work and trying to get himself through all of this as well. What about people who are on their own? And there are a number of people who wrote to me when my diagnosis went public and I said I'm going into hospital later in May, and I'd sort of set out the chronology. And I actually got some angry emails from around the country of people saying, basically accusing me of going private and jumping the queue. And I wasn't private. I was on the NHS, unsurprisingly, as a Labour MP. And my team got quite defensive of me and said, these emails are outrageous. And I said, well, no, that I don't think they are coming. I don't think they are outrageous. You've got to bear in mind these are people who are going through a really awful time with cancer. They are on these waiting lists. They are frightened and scared, and they've seen this guy who looks kind of young and healthy on the telly saying that he's about to go in for an operation, and they're still waiting. So you can understand their anger, and I sort of put myself in their shoes. It's one of the reasons why when I came back, I've sort of been raising the issue of NHS waiting lists and supporting John Ashworth, the Shadow Health Secretary, to say, look, we've got to make this a really big issue, because it's not just the cancer waiting list you've got to keep an eye on. It's the other waiting list, because in those cases of routine treatments and scans and checkups for other things, that is where you often find cancer. That's what happened to me. So we've got to get those waiting lists down, and we have to provide better support. You mentioned Macmillan, who are brilliant sources of support. Kidney cancer charity were brilliant as well. But it shouldn't just be about charity. And I do think in a number of aspects of health and care, this country is over-reliant on charity, and it shouldn't just be left to charity to support people.
But in a way, you can understand why people think, oh, well, he's an MP. Of course they're going to give him special treatment. Did you ever have to think or say to anyone in the NHS, I don't want any special treatment. You've got to treat me just as you would anyone else?
I was more worried when I was going with things like the biopsy, and people say, oh, what's your job? I was really tempted to lie, because I thought I don't want them to kind of like poke and prod me a bit harder, saying, but do you support the pay rise? But no, actually, they were lovely. But no, the funny thing is that I forgot to mention him when I went in for the ultrasound, because I said there were two things. Like, one was he ruled out all these things, and I thought it might be cancer. But the other thing he basically said was, time is important, so don't feel guilty about chasing appointments and chasing scans. And I had to. Like, when they gave me the wrong scan, I was on the phone chasing the CT scan. Now, at no point did I ever go to the chief exec of the trust and say, hello, I'm an MP, front of the queue, please, or anything like that. But I was just as a regular...
Our friend Jackie Smith now chairs your trust, doesn't
exactly.
she?
Well, Jackie wasn't there at the time. But I mean, actually, I used PALS, the patient liaison service at the hospital, like anyone else would, to try and get a bit of advocacy and get a bit of support, because I thought I don't want to do anything that makes it look like I'm... just trying to jump the queue. And actually, one of my neighbouring MPs, who has been a brilliant support, she basically rang me, and she sort of interrogated me about where I was going, who I was seeing, and she said, I'm just going to check. I want to check this out. I want to make sure you're getting the best treatment, and I do this for my constituents. So don't you start complaining about special treatment. I better not say any more, because people will guess who she is. But people were really. I didn't get any special treatment because I was an MP. I did get some useful insights as I was going around having tests and checkups, because I was, as I said to the health secretary at the time when he messaged me to say good luck with it, I said I'm happy to do some mystery shopping for you and tell you how I get on.
Did you?
Well, he was. I think less said about that the better, because he was moved on as health secretary, wasn't he?
True,
so less said about Matt Hancock, the better, I think.
Well, bless him. Right, we will take some calls in a moment. 0345 6060 973 if you want to talk to Wes about any aspect of what he's been telling you about so far. Or we could also take the odd political call, I suppose, couldn't we? I mean,
no, you're going to drop me in
the
it.
habit of a lifetime. 0345 6060 973 if you want to talk to Wes Streeting. It's 9:32. News headlines with Kevin McGrath.
Police investigating the death of a teacher found in a park in southeast London have arrested a 38-year-old man. The body of Sabina Nessa was discovered on Saturday at Cater Park in Kidbrooke. The 28-year-old was last seen alive on Friday night before walking to meet her friend in a pub. Keep buying fuel as usual, we're being told by the government, after some forecourts closed temporarily. Supply chain issues caused by a shortage of tanker drivers are affecting some BP and Tesco sites operated by Esso. Recruitment in the HGV sector has been hit by the pandemic and Brexit. And an attempt by a woman with Down syndrome to overturn UK abortion laws has failed at the High Court. Terminations in England, Wales and Scotland are allowed up to birth for babies at risk of having the condition. Heidi Crowther, who's 26, have been arguing the laws are discriminatory. LBC weather, mostly dry overnight with some rain for Western Scotland and Northern Ireland, lows of 11. Into Friday, more rain for northern and western areas. Drier elsewhere though, with sunny spells, looking at highs of 23 degrees.
This is LBC. Steady. Iain Dale on LBC.
It's 9:36. Wes Streeting is with me. We're talking about his cancer diagnosis and recovery. Well, let's talk a little bit about the recovery, because you said you went back to work a lot earlier than you'd probably intended to.
Yeah, it was a bit up and down. So I had a couple of infections coming out of the operation, which is not unusual, sort of given what I'd been through, but it did set back my recovery a bit. And meant my mobility wasn't as good as it could have been early on. And it's hard when you kind of come out of an operation like that, because your initial exercise goals are things like move from bed to sofa, have a shower today, and once you've done that, you're pretty knackered.
It's my daily routine.
Just trying to improve a bit. It's annoying, isn't it? There are some days where you just think, just all I want to do is just sit on the sofa with a duvet and watch loads of films. And then, when it's forced on you, it's no fun, especially when you've had like abdominal surgery. So, and then, as I was sort of saying earlier, there were difficulties like working out how to get in and out of bed without feeling like your stitches are about to pop open. And in the end, Joe ended up finding on YouTube this Australian physiotherapist who was giving advice to women who'd had caesarean sections about how to swing themselves into bed and up again. So I was using that. I mean, honestly, you just lose your dignity when you have an operation like this, because, it's your urinary system. I remember going in for one of my infections. I went in and they had to kind of poke around places you don't really want to be poked around. And I walked into my doctor's surgery, and there's the doctor, there's the medical student who I'd spoken to on the phone who I was expecting to see. So I thought, well, I don't mind seeing the two of them. And then there were these three other medical students, and and my doctor said, now, feel free to say no, but would you mind if they observe? And I said, I don't mind two of you having a poke around, but please let me preserve what little dignity I have after a few days in hospital with a catheter. So, so there are bits like that you have to just cope with, and you have to just kind of zone it out. And but there are other things, and this comes into the money stuff. Like, I was really struggling to sleep, and Joe got me one of these kind of V-shaped pillows from kind of John Lewis, which help support your back. Now, those sorts of things do cost an arm and a leg. If you haven't got any money, how are you forking out for that? Loads of our friends actually sent us kind of vouchers for cook, so we could get these ready to bung in the oven meals, and we didn't have to worry about cooking. And they were very nice, but they're not cheap. And what about people who are living on their own and don't have the money to go out and just kind of do it? So, all these things along, I do think it's almost the aftercare where I think we really, because when you get the diagnosis, the NHS kicks in like Rolls-Royce engine. But I think sometimes it's the aftercare where people fall through the cracks. And if I hadn't had Joe, and if I hadn't had that wider support network, it would have been a hell of a lot harder for me.
Was there any point in the recovery where you thought, I'm never going to be the same again?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Really little thought, I looked at myself in the mirror and I could see all the scars, and I thought, I was joking, people saying, oh no, that's my career as a swimmer model over with. That was my last big ambition in life. I mean,
Ibiza's out this year then.
never going to happen anyway. I don't think there's anything to worry about. It was more the way in which I've responded in terms of my own health and diet, because honestly, for years and years, I've been saying, I must lose some weight, I must eat healthier, I must drink less. And if it was just about wanting to kind of look better and lose a bit of flab around my tummy, I would still be the same person I was before. But having that kind of fear of diabetes and just the realisation that I'm not getting any younger, serious health conditions aren't just things that happen to older people, that has really, really changed my outlook and mindset, and I take it much, much, much more seriously than I did before.
Which is actually quite difficult in the kind of job that you do, because you are on the go,
on the go all the time.
And I mean, I know the hours I keep doing this job, it's not conducive to a healthy lifestyle, and you find yourself eating rubbish a lot of the time. And you don't actually mean to do it, but it's just, you either eat that or you don't.
Exactly, and that's hard. And so I'm trying to plan a lot better around my meals, and trying to be a bit more sensible about my choices. But the job does mitigate against it. And one of the things as well is like cutting down on the amount of alcohol that I drink. And I'll be honest, there are points at which being a Labour MP in the last 5 or 6 years have really encouraged me towards the bottle and cracking open a bottle of wine at the end of the day. So, just making a bit more kind of sensible choices. And again, this is about willpower and mindset. And if it was just about me wanting to kind of look and feel better, I would still be, in the tea room going for like the kind of shepherd's pie options and the kind of lasagnas and the chips and instead I'm making much healthier choices because of that. That's the fear I still have off the back of all of this, is now just the fear of diabetes.
So, well, you're talking to a type 2 diabetic, so I can give you some advice on that. But
you've got 2 kidneys to deal with it, though. That's the danger.
Yeah, absolutely. You've been given the all clear. What does that actually mean? Because I think it's only natural to think, well, if I've had it once, it could come back.
So I've got a 2% chance of the cancer coming back. So I'll take those chances. The other thing is I've mentioned the urologist when he gave me the diagnosis said you're going to have a kidney removed, and in an odd way that was reassuring. So I just thought, get it out, take that kidney with it. The thought of like having my kidney kind of sliced was, a bit squeamish and
you haven't got
bit
it in
worrying.
a bottle on a shelf anywhere.
No,
do you know,
one of my regrets is I really wanted to have a look at it. I know it's like really, really weird, but I just thought I would have liked to have seen this kind of thing that was gave me all this grief, and. But then when I went in to see the surgeon who was going to perform the surgery, he said, I am going to try and save your kidney. I've got no guarantees. And if for any reason I think it's too risky, I'll just take the whole thing out. And you won't know whether you've got 1 or 2 kidneys until you come round, basically. And he brought me round and he said, I'm really sorry, I couldn't save the kidney. And it was a difficult decision. And I was like, you've made the right decision. Because honestly, although it would have, of course, 2 kidneys better than 1. I think if they'd tried to chop the tumour out and leave the kidney in there, I'd be much more frightened about my scan that's coming up. Whereas as it is, 2% chance of the cancer recurring, although they've taken the kidney out, so it's obviously not coming back there because it's not there anymore. So I'm feeling very positive. I've got a scan sometime before Christmas, then an annual scan for the next couple of years, but I'm on a low risk pathway now, so I'm just counting my lucky stars, to be honest.
Counting your lucky stars that you're going to Labour Party conference next week.
Indeed, yeah.
Which we will talk about in just a moment. It's 9:45.
Coming up at 10 on LBC, Tom Swarbrick.
Don't panic, says the government, but the shelves are emptying, petrol stations are closing, gas is in short supply, but at least the weather's all right. Are you ignoring the advice not to panic buy?
Tom Swarbrick on LBC. Leading Britain's conversation. Iain Dale. Tweet at LBC.
It's 9:47. Couple of texts to read out. Somebody says, just want to say how pleased I am that Wes is doing so well and able to speak about his experience so brilliantly. Jamie says, how down to earth this guy is. A real breath of fresh air hearing an MP talk openly and honestly about their life and showing compassion. And Alan in Caterham says, since Blair and Brown, I've only ever voted Tory. This guy Wes Streeting is everything that Keir Starmer isn't. He sounds like a real person and I'd vote for him. Fantastic show as always. Thank you, Alan. Well, that brings me neatly onto your nascent leadership campaign,
for
Wes.
God's sake.
Well, I'm reliably informed by people on the left of the Labour Party that this whole leadership change that Keir Starmer wants to do is so that you can be the next leader of the Labour Party.
Yeah, I wouldn't listen to a word they say. What Keir Starmer is looking to do, and not just in terms of the Labour Party rule book, but more generally in terms of our kind of policy programme and what we want to do for the country, is to change the Labour Party from being hardwired to talking to itself, being focused on the issues that motivate us and Labour Party members, and to look outward to the country. And there are lots of ways in which the Labour Party structures...
How can you look outward to the country when it's all about changing your own rule book?
Well, for two reasons. I mean, one is, take the way in which we reselect MPs, for example. We've got a system that if you think back to before the last election, that kind of summer into the autumn, lots of Labour MPs, myself included, were going through these so-called trigger ballots to be reselected as candidates. The Tories were out on the doorsteps talking to the voters. And the way the system currently works is that all it takes is for a third of your members to trigger this contest. And you spend even more time talking to members. And not a single Labour MP was deselected on those rules, but it did take a huge amount of time and energy that should have been spent talking to voters. So we should change that system so that we're actually getting our candidates in place quickly, getting out there with a positive message. And what the conference will be about is, of course, there are the internal rulebook things that are always done at the beginning of conferences. But then I think what you'll see over the course of the next week, especially from sort of Rachel Reeves' speech as Shadow Chancellor on Monday, Keir Starmer closing the conference on Wednesday, is for the first time given we've had the pandemic, first time since we lost the last general election, people will get a sense of where we are now, how we plan to win back trust and confidence and support to win the next general election, and a chance to set out a vision for a post-pandemic, post-Brexit country.
How is it possible to justify going away from one member, one vote? That surely has to be the most democratic way of electing a leader. The Liberal Democrats now do it. The Tories were the first to do it. It would be ridiculous to go back to this electoral college, giving the unions a share of the vote again. That's not going to be electorally popular. And it seems to me that it's purely designed to prevent someone like Jeremy Corbyn from being elected in the future.
Well, we already have a sort of a form of college in the sense that we have trade union members voting in Labour leadership elections as it is. I actually think that's a strength of our system, not a weakness. And, today the GMB General Secretary, Gary Smith, has been out ahead of conference, very supportive of Keir, wants him to succeed, but rightly reminding the Labour Party that we have to be rooted in the interests of working people, and that the disconnect is between us and the country is significant, and it's got to be closed. We all get that. So I think there's a positive influence there. As for how you change a leadership election rules to kind of make it fairer and to make sure we end up with a candidate that is able to win elections with the country, not just to win elections within the party, there are lots of things you could change, and there are still conversations ongoing, and we don't know quite yet what will come out at the conference. And look, to be honest, voters are not going to be excited by the Labour Party rulebook, and we don't expect them to be. That's not going to be the focus of the conference. That's going to be the first day of conference, if that. What is more important is the vision that we set out for the country. And I think particularly for Keir Starmer, who was elected as leader during the pandemic, like the rest of politics, the focus has been the pandemic. He's got an opportunity in his speech next week, which I know he's going to take, of setting out who he is, what he stands for, and why he wants to be Prime Minister of our country. And I genuinely think, having worked with him, and it's not just because the way he supported me and the personal support I've had from him, I genuinely think Keir Starmer is the best candidate for Prime Minister fielded by any political party since 2010. And that's about his integrity, his experience, his values, his vision for the country. He's someone that I want to see in number 10. And I think we've reached a point in the pandemic now where voters are now open to hearing about other issues. And I think people are prepared to give the Labour Party another look under new leadership, and we're going to take that opportunity.
So you're not doing an Andy Burnham and showing a bit of leadership ankle?
No.
Well, because, I mean, today, Aaron Bastani from Novara Media, he's alleging that you've raised £100,000 in donations to your office. You've hired someone called Adam McNicholas to build a leadership campaign. And apparently 2 days ago, you deleted 160 tweets from your Twitter feed.
Last point, I have not deleted 160 tweets 2 days ago, but more fundamentally, what I have done, as lots of shadow cabinet members do and people in government, is to fundraise to make sure that in the constituency and in terms of my front bench responsibilities that I've got the staff support I need. That's all it's about. In fact, thanks to fundraising, I was able to commission some research by an academic at Loughborough University looking at the economic impact of child poverty, and found that £38 billion is currently being spent on the symptoms of child poverty when we should be tackling the cause of child poverty. You know, fundraising in politics, it is part of the job.
Well, I mean, I can confirm when I worked for David Davis, when they were in opposition, we used to fundraise in exactly the same way to do exactly the same things.
But the other thing, I mean,
you get short money, the money that the opposition gets to fund opposition activities, but it doesn't go very far.
Yeah, and also thanks to the politics that Aaron Bastani championed all those years, one of the reasons we're all out fundraising is because the Labour Party lost seats and therefore lost income at the last election. And I'm not prepared to sit on my backside, grumbling and moaning. I want to roll my sleeves up and make sure that the next general election we have a Labour government. And the other thing I was criticised for today, which I found hilarious, was apparently I've been on a kind of a tour of the country, sort of promoting myself. It's called local election campaigning. Yes, in the aftermath of my cancer diagnosis, I was campaigning around the country for Labour candidates. This is what good shadow ministers are supposed to do. So I'm very happy to be criticised for doing a good job. I'm very, very happy to be upsetting the sort of people I seem to be attracting the ire of on social media. I think to be honest, these are all symptoms of the fact that the Labour Party is changing. It's moving in a new direction. It's moving closer to where the voters are, and there are some people who don't like it. But instead of throwing rocks on social media, they might want to reflect on why it is that Labour lost the last general election, because there are plenty of us who understand now that we've lost 4 general elections in a row and are not prepared for us to lose a 5th.
Do you, in your heart of hearts, though, think that the Labour Party itself and the leadership of the party really understands why you lost the last election? Because I thought the paper that Ed Miliband wrote on this, that he was asked to do it by Keir Starmer, I'm not sure that really got to the real reasons why Labour has lost so often.
I think Keir does understand. I think Keir absolutely understands. Rachel Reeves, our Shadow Chancellor, absolutely understands, and that's why you'll be hearing a lot from her on Monday about how we re-earn the trust of voters to be trusted with their money. Because for me, look, the one thing that all 4 of our election defeats have in common, and in fact, I've probably looking back over history, all of our election defeats have in common, is that people often assume the Labour Party's heart's in the right place, but they need to know our head's in the right place too. So they know that we're a party that cares about inequality. They know we want to invest in public services. They know we built the NHS. But what they always want reassurance about is, can we trust you with our money? Will you be the party of law and order? Will you safeguard our national security? Keir gets all of those things. And I think you will see, you've kind of seen a bit of it today with the essay he published with the Fabian Society. But more significantly, his conference speech, which will get a lot of attention and coverage because it's his first big speech to the Labour Party conference. Last year it was online, which was a great speech, but it wasn't the same. And Boris Johnson made a big announcement about COVID restrictions the same day, so it didn't get the same sort of coverage it would have had. So this conference is really important for us because we might only have 2 Labour conferences before the next general election. And that's why we're seizing that opportunity to start setting out what a Labour government would look like, what our vision is for Britain post-pandemic, post-Brexit. And I hope that will be an important staging post in regaining the trust and support of the voters, who I think are increasingly willing to give Labour a second look. They've noticed we've got a different leader. They like the fact we've got a different leader. And now they're interested in what he's got to say.
Robert in Norwich says, 5 years ago, I heard Brandon Lewis, the MP for Great Yarmouth, complain that the Labour Party did not provide a decent opposition, and that made government less effective. For years, Labour has indulged in more navel-gazing than the totally unbuttoned sea lords. Don't understand that. Wes Streeting is absolutely right about Labour needing to engage with the electorate properly and not its internal politics. JPW describes you as a Tory in disguise. And Kay says, are you pro-UBI, Universal Basic Income?
No. I mean, it's an interesting argument for universal basic income, but I don't think you can persuade the voters that everyone should get money from government regardless of their income. I think people would wonder how it'd be paid for. I think people would want to see their money spent differently and in a better way. And as for the kind of Tory, I always laugh at this sort of Tory in disguise stuff, or Tory careerists. I mean, if I was a Tory careerist, a good place to be would be the Conservative Party. Not least they're better at winning elections than we are. No, I'm in the Labour Party because I'm motivated by social justice and tackling inequality. I grew up on a council estate in East London. I'm one of those people who received free school meals. Thanks to a Labour government, I was able to make it to university. I always believe that a Labour government is better than a Tory government, but I pull my hair out about the fact that the Tory Party shows more ruthlessness in wanting to win and winning elections than the Labour Party. And, I do think we have to take some responsibility for the fact that Tories keep on winning elections, and we've got to raise our game.
Was